everyone. My name is Alyssa. I'm the event coordinator at Bank Square Books in Mystic, and we're so excited to have Chris Bohjalian here with us tonight. He is, for those of you who don't know, the best-selling author of 19 books, including Midwives, Sandcastle Girls, and his the newest book, The Guest Room, which just came out in paperback. He also has a new book called The Sleepwalker, which will be released in January. The Guest Room, in short, it's kind of a complicated plot without spoilers, but it tells the story of human trafficking and two girls who are forced into that world. It tells the story of a party gone horribly wrong and a family's attempt to cope in the aftermath. She's gotten amazing reviews and just a lot of wonderful things that people have said about it. In the Washington Post, Anita Shreve wrote, "The Guest Room has an edge-of-the-seat momentum that propels the reader straight to the last page. For those who value the well-researched novel, the author's 18th book will please." Chris's books have been chosen for so many best books of the year by pretty much every publication. Some of them include the Washington Post, Publishers Weekly, Salon, Kirkus, and Library Journal. He's also won many awards for his writing, including the New England Book Award, the New England Society Book Award, and the ANCA Freedom Award. And 3 of Chris's books have been turned into movies. So we're very delighted to have you with us here tonight. Everyone, please welcome Chris Bohjalian.
Thank you, Alyssa, for that wonderful introduction. It is a pleasure, it is an honor, it is a privilege to be in Groton, to be back under the wonderful umbrella of Bank Square Books, and to see 62 people here for Game 7 of the World Series. We are going to be dropping down a screen behind me so you can follow along. I'm actually in shock. There are 62 of you here. I bow before your utter awesomeness. A couple of years ago, 2004, I was in New England for 3 consecutive nights as the Red Sox were coming back against the Yankees in the American League Championship Series. It was me and a librarian. It is a particular pleasure to be back in Groton. I love this area. I love everything that Bank Square Books does. And I'm thrilled to be here because I'm in the middle of a book tour. And make no mistake, I like book tours. It wasn't all that long ago that my book sold briskly, but only among people with my last name. I try never to lose sight of that. The thing is, though, most people presume book tours are unbelievably glamorous. You jet around the country and you hang with Oprah and Katie Couric and Terry Gross and sell whole pallets of books. The reality is that when you are not under the wonderful umbrella of Bank Square Books, it can be bloody terrifying out there. I will tell you but 3 moments from actual book tours on which I've been on. Moment number 1, I'm in Seattle, and I'm speaking at the Seattle Public Library. And so during the day, my media escort is bringing me to the local bookstore so I can sign the stock. I'm going to go to one particular bookstore, and there's no sign of my new novel anywhere on the new table, anywhere among staff recommends. It's not even in fiction. Now, I tell myself, ever the optimist, well, it is number 6 on the New York Times bestseller list this week, so clearly they've sold out. But just in case, I go up to the woman behind the counter and I say, "Hi, my name is Chris Bohjalian. This is my new book. If you've got some copies, I'd be happy to sign them." And she looks at her computer and says, "Oh yeah, I see we ordered 3. Still got them." She then brings me to the back of the store, and there on a shelf so high that Shaquille O'Neal couldn't reach these books are those 3 copies, spine in. So I said, "Well, if you'd like to get them down, I'd be happy to sign them." And she says, and this is an exact quote, "No, I'd rather you didn't. Our readers are very discriminating." So then, another tour, I'm in San Francisco, and I've had a lovely event, and now the event is over, and I'm signing books. And a gentleman leans way over the table into my personal space. And this was a couple years ago, and he says, "I don't know if you heard, but J.D. Salinger died." And I said, I had heard. He said, "And Robert Parker, poof, he's gone." I said, I heard that too. He said, "And just the other day, Howard Zinn passed away." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You worried?" And finally, there is this. I'm in New York City doing an audio panel, a book about audiobooks, because I love audiobooks. And on my right is Adriana Trigiani, Big Stone Gap, Lucia. And on my left is a naturalist, Alan Tennant, who is chronicling his remarkable stories following falcons and raptors as they migrated from Canada to South America. For the first 15 minutes, the panel is very egalitarian. Adriana's getting questions, Alan's getting questions, I'm getting questions. About 15 minutes into the panel, I look to my left, and I see being rolled onto the stage a carton. It's the size of a dishwasher, and oh dear Lord, it has air holes. I know what is in that carton. And I think of what W.C. Fields once said, you never ever want to perform with small children or interesting animals. And indeed, my worst fears are realized when Alan Tennant gets out the glove. The big leather glove with the ties and the buckles and the stays. And his assistant places onto his arm a proud, majestic red-tailed falcon. And for the next 45 minutes, Adriana and I are completely invisible. I could have tapped on my microphone and said, I know what's in those emails. Nothing. It doesn't matter. Let it go. And no one would have cared. The bird is that interesting. So after about 45 minutes of not saying a word, a woman in the very back row raises her hand, and the moderator recognizes her, and she says, I have a question for Chris. So I sit up, put the toothpicks into my eyes, and try to look attentive. And she says, you haven't told us anything about your new book. I don't know, how are the reviews? And before I can answer this lovely, underhand, slow-pitched question, the bird, which is still on Alan's arm, poops. Raptor poop is not pigeon poop. Everyone can see this. And so the moderator leans into his microphone and says, well, we know what the bird thinks of his book. That never happens in Groton, Connecticut. Earlier this year, I gave a talk before a very, very different crowd. It was in a public library in northern New England, and there were about 60 or 65 children in the audience because it was children's story hours. And so I read a bunch of children's books, and I decided to end with Horton Hears a Who. And the first time we got to that line in the book, a person's a person no matter how small, spontaneously I decided to have the children say it out loud with me. A person's a person no matter how small, because it is a beautiful validation of the importance of small children. And the next time we got to the line, I had them say it out loud again, but even louder. And the time after that, when we reached the line, I had them shouting it. Now, the thing about Seuss is this. When he had a good line, he used it a lot. And so by the time we finished with Horton Hears a Who, I had those little kids absolutely rocking and rolling in their mats and their pillows and the beanbag chairs on the floor. We were having a great time and raising the roof of that library. So I go to the back of the room, and I'm handed one of those teeny tiny Dixie cups full of fruit juice. And as I'm drinking it, I see two adults looking at me, and they're looking a tad troubled, annoyed, perhaps even miffed. And then one of them says to me over our teeny tiny Dixie cups full of fruit juice, do you really think you should have gotten the children so riled up about books? We are, after all, in a library. And I wasn't sure what to say, but fortunately the children's librarian came over and she was smiling ear to ear. She said, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. There's nothing we like to see more than the little kids getting juiced about books. I loved that. Juiced about books. All of you who are here tonight, especially Game 7 tonight, know something we try to teach our children and our grandchildren all the time, but as grown-ups we all too often tend to forget. And that's this. Reading is meant to be fun. It is capable of evoking from us the same conversational enthusiasms, movies and music and stage plays, if we only give the notion a chance. I have got to give a shout out to a couple of libraries, because of course there are a number of libraries that are supporting this event tonight. I am a writer for many reasons, but a big one is the Hialeah Miami Lakes Public Library. My family moved from a suburb of New York City in Fairfield County to Miami, Florida, arguably another suburb of New York City. And we moved there the Friday of Labor Day weekend when I was in 8th grade. The following Tuesday, I started school at Palm Springs Junior High. And then after school, I went to see my new orthodontist, a sadist it would turn out if ever there was one. He gave me this orthodontic headgear that looked like the business end of a backhoe. And I had to wear it 4 hours a day, never sleeping, couldn't speak when I was wearing it. So what would I do? I would come home from school, I would go to the Hialeah Miami Lakes Public Library, and I'd read. And because this was just about when Stephen King started to publish his remarkable Grand Guignol, I was reading Stephen King and William Peter Blatty, The Exorcist, Peter Benchley's deceptively fine novel, Jaws, and I also read a different kind of book as well. This was the first time that I read Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, Joyce Carol Oates' remarkable National Book Award finalist novel, Expensive People. From the King and the Blatty and the Benchley, I first had an understanding of linear momentum in a book. What is it that really creates narrative drive? And from Harper Lee and Joyce Carol Oates, I learned that the first-person narrator is a fictional construct too. And every bit is made up as the characters around him or her. All of this knowledge would eventually take root in my work. It would take a long time. I amassed 250 rejection slips before I sold a single word, and I am responsible for the single worst first novel ever published, bar none. How bad is my first novel? How many of you read A Killing in the Real World? Thank God. I wrote that particular novel when my wife and I were still living in Brooklyn. And I wrote it between 5 and 7 a.m. in the morning. And then we'd go to work at an ad agency. My wife was working on the 104th floor of 2 World Trade as a bond trader. And I moved to Vermont after I finished it. So now the book is published, and my wife and I are living in Vermont. And on a Sunday afternoon in August, my wife gets a phone call from her college roommate who lives in Boston and says, "Oh my gosh, Chris's book. It's got a really big review in today's Boston Globe." And my wife is thrilled and says, "Oh my gosh, is it a good review?" And her roommate, realizing she's made an egregious mistake, says, "I don't remember." So my wife says, "Can you read it to us?" And her roommate, thinking far more clearly now, says, "I've already bound the newspapers up for recycling, and they're in the basement of the apartment." Now, this was a few years before you could go www.bostonglobe.com and assess the carnage. So it'd be the next day, a Monday, that I would get a copy of the newspaper and read a review of my first novel that ends. And so, although Bohjalian attacks his first novel with real energy, his writing is styleless and without grace, and the quaint St. Martin's tradition of citing the editor in the acknowledgments, in this case, did absolutely nothing to ensure the quality of editorial detail. Aren't you glad you are joining me tonight? I've gotten better. If only out of practice I had to have gotten better. But so many of those lessons that I learned as either a middle schooler or when I was honing my craft, amassing those 250 rejection slips, were valuable in such books as The Guest Room. And as a matter of fact, I still begin my day at about 5 in the morning, just as I did when I was living in Brooklyn and had to stop work at 7 a.m. to shower and shave and take a subway into work. But a lot has changed. For example, I used to begin my day by reading poetry, and occasionally I will still do that. More likely, though, I'm now likely to watch movie trailers on my computer. I love movie trailers. They instantly, these 2 and 3 minute long, impeccably produced commercials for films, transport you into a particular moment. So when I was writing The Guest Room, among the trailers that I watched over and over were Boyhood, whenever I wanted the wistfulness of a parent. Or I would watch Birdman, so I could see one middle-aged man wanting desperately to do something important, to make a difference. Because I was in those moments thinking about either Kristen and Richard as parents, or Richard as a father who has to look his wife and his daughter in the eye after a travesty I will describe for you in a few moments. And these days, given the book I'm writing right now, I have been watching over and over the trailers for Miss Peregrine's School for Peculiar Children, a movie that I've actually seen 3 times, or the Emma Stone, Ryan Gosling movie that opens in a few weeks, La La Land, or the trailer for one of my favorite novels of 2011, Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, soon to be an Ang Lee movie. When I finished a rough draft of The Guest Room, my wife finished reading the manuscript in bed and turned to me and said, "Wow, you've finally done it. Breaking Bad meets The Bonfire of the Vanities." Which was the ultimate compliment, because I always loved every minute of Breaking Bad, and I certainly loved Tom Wolfe's novel. But I knew what she was getting at. The reality is that I write 2 kinds of books: contemporary literature and historical fiction. And the contemporary literature are such books as The Double Bind, about Laurel Esterbrook, a social worker in Vermont who believes she's found the bastard son of Jay Gatsby and Daisy Faye Buchanan. Or Close Your Eyes, Hold Hands, about Emily Shepard, a 16-year-old girl trying to keep it together after a meltdown at Vermont's lone nuclear plant. The historical fiction, well, it's such novels as The Light in the Ruins, about one Italian family's complicity with the Nazis in the Second World War and the price they will pay years later. Or The Sandcastle Girls, a big, sweeping, epic love story set in the midst of the Armenian genocide. All of these books have 2 things in common, 2 threads that I hope are woven into The Guest Room. The first thread, well, it's an emotion, it's a sensation, and it's one, whenever I think of it, I think of one of my favorite moments in Mad Men, one of my favorite TV shows. You don't ever have to have seen Mad Men to know this kind of moment. A middle school-aged girl named Sally Draper gets out of a cab in New York City's Upper East Side. And instead of going to school, she goes back to her father Don Draper's apartment. And everyone who's watching that episode knows that she is going to catch her father in bed with a downstairs neighbor, and it is going to be devastating for dad and daughter. And I was watching this at 5 of 11 at night in my TV room in Vermont, my wife sound asleep in our bedroom, and I was talking to the television set. I was saying, "No, no, Sally, no, get back in the cab, don't go home." But of course she does go home, she catches her father, and it is cataclysmic for the 2 of them. That emotion, it's dread. When my books work, and heaven knows they do not always, they are about dread. When I was sharing this with somebody a couple of days ago, she said to me, "I agree that there's a lot of dread in your books, but I want to draw your attention to the epigraph of The Guest Room. It's not so much dread, it's regret." The epigraph from The Guest Room, it's from one of my favorite doorstops, Dr. Zhivago. "I don't think I could love you more deeply if you lived a life with no regrets." The other thread that runs through all of my work and that runs through the guest room, well, it goes back to something my daughter said. My daughter is a 22-year-old actor in New York City. When she was 19, she read a rough draft of Close Your Eyes, Hold Hands. And after reading it, she said, "Dad, take this as a compliment, because I mean it that way. But I think your sweet spot as a writer is seriously messed up young women." And of course, she's right. Just think of the women in some of the books I just mentioned to you. Laurel Esterbrook in The Double Bind, spiraling into madness after a cataclysmic sexual assault. Emily Shepard in Close Your Eyes, Holds Hands, popping OxyContin tablets like M&Ms and living in an igloo made of black plastic trash bags filled with wet frozen leaves. Or, in my historical fiction, Serafina Bettini in The Light in the Ruins, Florence's first homicide detective, but a woman who was a partisan in World War II, forever disfigured by a firefight with the Nazis. Or all of those young women and girls in The Sandcastle Girls, Karine, Nevart, Hatun, forever scarred by what they witnessed, experienced, and lost under the searing Syrian sun in 1915. You will meet another girl just like them in the guest room. So the guest room, it had its origins in August of 2013. My wife and my daughter and I were in Yerevan, Armenia, and on this particular trip, we'd brought with us a friend of my daughter's. She was part Armenian. The two girls were 19 years old. We had a wonderful week together. My daughter's friend was going home a day before my family. She was on a 6 a.m. flight to Moscow and then west. And because I'm a dad, I said to her, "Meet me in the hotel lobby at 3:30 in the morning so I can bring you to the airport, get you checked in, get you as far as security." And because I'm a dad, I was actually downstairs in the lobby at 3 a.m. And as I was waiting for my daughter's friend, I saw another young woman, younger than my daughter, maybe 17. And she was quite clearly an escort, and she was paying off the bellman to go upstairs and go back to work. And this broke my heart. It broke my heart as a father, and it broke my heart as an Armenian American. And I began to wonder, what is her story? How did she wind up doing this? And when you research prostitution in the Caucasus and the Middle East, you are but a razor-thin line away from researching human trafficking. The reality is that human trafficking is a $150 billion worldwide business. Siddharth Kara, who teaches at Harvard, estimates that sexual slavery, one component of human trafficking, involves at least 1.2 million young women, girls, and boys who've been trafficked. Right here in the United States, 1 out of every 6 runaway teens is likely a sex slave somewhere. Brothel, trailer park, truck stop, no-tell motel. When did human trafficking become this Western issue? When we think of sexual slavery, we think of the Far East, we think of the Philippines, we think of Manila. 1990. The Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union collapsed, and all of the economies of the Soviet republics and satellite nations fell into economic disrepair. And who is the bottom of the economic totem pole always? Young women and girls. And suddenly, business was booming for traffickers. Most of the sex slaves in Italy are Romanian and Moldovan, girls from what was Eastern Europe. If you are an Armenian girl and you are trafficked, you are likely to be trafficked to Moscow, Dubai, or the cruelest irony of all, Istanbul. So, the guest room. The guest room is a literary thriller, a novel of suspense about a marriage in crisis, two remarkable women, and that one moment you wish more than anything you could take back. Who are the players? There are four. Three Americans and one Armenian. Who are the Americans? Well, Kristen and Richard Chapman. Kristen is a high school history teacher in Bronxville, a lovely suburb of New York City in Westchester. She is married to Richard, an investment banker, not really a wolf of Wall Street, a mild-mannered, perfectly decent guy. They have what I hope is an adorable 9-year-old daughter, Melissa. And Richard and Kristen decide, oh, what the heck. We'll hold Richard's idiot younger brother Philip's bachelor party at our house in Bronxville. It has to be less sleazy than if the bachelor party is at some strip club in New York City. They expect that Richard's idiot younger brother's friends will bring out to Westchester a stripper. And so Kristen brings Melissa to New York City to her mother's apartment on the Upper East Side for the weekend. And they fully expect for a couple of hours the middle-aged men will be boys. The boys will be boys. Instead, however, Richard's idiot younger brother's friends bring out to Westchester what they believe are not strippers, but two high-end escorts, who are not in fact escorts, but turn out to be sex slaves. Two 19-year-old Armenian girls, abducted when they are 14 and 15 years old, imprisoned in Moscow for nearly 5 years, and now brought to the United States. And the two girls, for a variety of reasons that are unveiled in the novel, kill their two Russian captors and escape into Times Square. So if you are Richard, how do you explain to your wife that night? Honey, don't come home tonight. The house is a crime scene. There are two dead Russians on the living room floor. And oh, by the way, I was upstairs in the guest room with one of the girls. How do you explain that to your 9-year-old daughter? And how do you explain that to your bosses at your investment bank on Water Street? That's chapter 1. The rest of the book chronicles the way Richard's life spirals out of control, the way he's put on a leave of absence at work, the way he's incapable of explaining what happened to his daughter, the way his marriage is coming apart at the seams, because if you're Kristen, how much can you trust him? How much can you believe about what he says happened and did not happen in the guest room? But if his life is problematic, it is nothing compared to what that fourth character, that young girl, Alexandra, now confronts. She's an Armenian girl, 19 years old. She's lived in the United States for exactly 21 days, and she's now on the run from the police and from the Russian gangsters who she knows will kill her in a heartbeat. Dread. Regret. When my books work, I think they walk a very fine line between heartbreak and hope. I obviously did my research when I was writing The Guest Room. I do research for all of my books, of course. As John Gardner said, there are two ways to wake a reader from the fictional dream: clumsiness, bad writing; inauthenticity, bad research. So I obviously did my homework into this issue. But I also never lost sight of something that E.M. Forrester said. We all know that fiction is truer than history because it goes beyond the evidence. We all know that fiction is truer than history because it goes beyond the evidence. No one would read The Guest Room if it were nothing more than a relentlessly violent, horrific, or demographically sound exploration of sexual slavery. Just as no one would have read The Sandcastle Girls if it was about nothing more than 1.5 million dead in the desert. I am first and foremost a storyteller, and I hope you read my books because you care deeply about the characters. You worry about them. Heaven knows I do. Whenever my books work, and Lord knows they don't always, but when they do and I finish one, I'm always left with a deep postpartum sadness. I miss the characters. And certainly when I finished The Guest Room, I missed Kristen, Melissa, and Richard. But most of all, I missed Alexandra. I worried about her. I wondered how she was doing. And I did something I've only done one other time in my life. I wrote a short story about her. Nothing very bad can happen to you there. It was published last year. You can still find it on the guest room page of my website. I get to Armenia at least once a year. I was there a couple of weeks ago. And whenever I'm there, I make sure I visit a place called Merdun. It's a 2-story house on a quiet block in a small city called Echmiadzin. It is a home for Armenian girls who've aged out of the orphanage system. Some of the girls there have endured the sort of sexual exploitation that makes all of us cringe. But whenever I think of Merdun, I'm actually rather inspired and happy, because these girls are amazing. These girls are learning to be grown-ups. They are learning to find work. They are learning to be empowered women themselves, who are not defined by whatever they did not have as children or whatever ways they may have been exploited as teenage girls. That's what I mean about heartbreak and hope. That's what I mean about characters that stay with me. Now, I do indeed want to introduce you to the next seriously messed up young women you can meet, and the book is The Sleepwalker. It arrives January 10th at Bank Square Books and all of these wonderful libraries. You can pre-order it from Bank Square Books, and it'll be waiting for you the day it goes on sale. You can reserve your copy at the library for the day that it arrives. Who are these seriously messed up young women I hope you'll care about in The Sleepwalker? There are two, Liana and Paige. The Sleepwalker is the story of them and their mother. In the year 2000, Annalie Ahlberg, who is a very rare form of parasomnia, sleepwalks into oblivion. One night, she just disappears. And now Liana, who was 21 in the year 2000, is 38, is still trying to explain, unravel, and understand her beloved mother's bizarre disappearance. I'm just going to read you a couple of pages to introduce you to the story. All of the chapters are preceded by a diary entry. So this is the first diary entry, and then I'm going to read the first page of chapter 1. It makes all the sense in the world. You awaken and smell smoke and see that the cat at the foot of the bed is on fire. And so you scoop him up and race to the bathroom and douse him with water in the tub. You reassure him that he'll be fine. He is fine, telling him that everything's okay. You hold him firmly but gently under the faucet because you are worried about his burns. The only thing is, you're not awake, but you're not precisely dreaming either. After all, in the morning, the sheets are wet where the cat slept when you both went back to bed, and there is fur in the tub. There are scratch marks on your arms and the back of your hands because the cat was justifiably resistant to the idea of a shower in the middle of the night. And of course, the animal was never on fire. Nothing in the house was on fire. And you're a reasonable person. You know that cats and dogs don't spontaneously combust. But in the middle of the night, in the fidelity of that instant, you were saving the cat's life. And that's all that mattered. Or another time you open your eyes in the charcoal dark and decide that you're hungry. So you stroll to the kitchen and whip up an omelet, tossing atop to the whisked eggs in the pan a little cheddar cheese and a handful of baby aspirin, a mortar and pestle, the ground orange a cure in the crock of a medieval apothecary, because in the murkiness of the moment you are craving the sweet and sour tang of orange St. Joseph's. Or you decide to go for a swim in the river. Or you are teased by a stirring between your legs, then a craving, and so you reach for the body beside you. And if no one's there, you push off the sheets and climb from your bed. You will search out a stranger who will satisfy it. With any luck, you will wake before you find one, but not always. You are vampiric. And while it would be easy to use words like insatiable or unquenchable, they would be imprecise, because the libertine needs of your sleeping soul will be sated. They will, and that's the problem. Chapter 1, and now you need to wildly suspend disbelief and see a balding, instead of seeing a balding middle-aged man in front of you, you see Liana Allberg, 38. Everyone in the county presumed that my mother's body was decaying, becoming porridge at the bottom of the Gale River. It was the year 2000, and we were but 3 seasons removed from the Y2K madness, the overwrought, feared end of the digital age. It was a moment in time when a pair of matching towers still stood near the tip of lower Manhattan. Fracking and photobomb and selfie were years from becoming words, but we were only months from adding to our vocabularies the expression hanging Chad. I was 21 that summer and fall, and my sister was 12. Neither of us fully recovered. Thank you